If I asked you if your faith was your own, how would you respond to that? Like, do you really have a relationship with Jesus Christ? Do you really know him? Or do you just piggyback off of the relationship that your family may have with him? And you think that you're a Christian because maybe your mom or dad are, or the leaders in your room, or maybe your close friends. You see, me growing up, it was my mom's desire for me to know who God was. She really wanted me to know him, and that's why I went to church. She took me to church, and I would sit and listen to the pastor's teachings, and it went in one ear and out the other. I went there really to make her happy, but at the same time, I also felt like I was a Christian because I was going to church. My mom wanted me to be a Christian. I was baptized, but really, the truth was I didn't know him. Somebody asked me one day, they're like, "Who is Jesus to you?" And I didn't know who he was to me. I mean, he died on the cross for my sins. Yeah, but why? It wasn't until I became much older where I understood what Jesus Christ had done for us, what he did for me, and how he rescued me, and he changed my life, and I laid up my life to follow him. That was a pivotal moment for me. But I'd say prior to that, I always piggybacked off the fact that it was my mom's faith and not my own. And I would ask you guys the same question. You see, tonight we're going to be looking at a judge, a prophet judge. He's the final one in our series as we've been digging through all of these guys. It's Samuel. Samuel's one of my favorite stories in the Bible. I named my own son after him. When I had become a fresh believer, he was one of the first guys that I dove into, and still to this day, as I've navigated through the Bible, he's still one of my favorite stories. And the reason for that is because we just got done with this whole crazy series, watching a lot of these guys. A lot of their lives were a train wreck, like somebody like Samson, who was enticed and dragged away by his desires and was living a lifestyle of sin. Well, we come to this next guy. His name is Samuel. And Samuel is the guy that bridges the gap from the time of the judges to the time of the kings, when the kings were anointed kings over Israel. And Samson, he was a kid that was born, had a really cool story how he's born, just like Samson was born as a Nazarite, and the Lord came to him. There was this woman, his mother, her name was Hannah. And this woman, Hannah, she wanted a child so desperately, but the Lord, she was barren. She couldn't give birth to anybody. So she went to the temple and she was just weeping and pouring her soul out to the Lord and asking him if he would give her and bless her with a son, she would dedicate him to the Lord. So the priest overhears her. This priest's name is Eli, and he thinks that she's drunk because she's just weeping. Her mouth is flapping, but there's no words coming out. And he addresses her and says, "What are you doing over here?" And she's like, "Listen, I'm not drunk. I'm just pouring my soul out to the Lord. I'm totally distressed. I want a son. I want to dedicate him to the Lord." And Eli says to her, "Listen, your request is going to be granted." So Hannah ends up conceiving and having a child, and she names him Samuel. And after she gets done weaning him off the milk, she takes him to the temple and she dedicates him to the Lord. And this boy Samuel, he grows up in the temple, and he's raised he's raised to know who God was. Eli came alongside him, but then there was this one time where he heard while he was sleeping the word of the Lord come to him, and he heard a voice that said, "Samuel, Samuel," and Samuel responds to this voice, he runs to Eli and he's like, "Did you call for me?" Eli's like, "No, I didn't call for you. Go back to bed." Well, it happens again, and he hears Samuel, Samuel again, and he runs back to Eli. He's like, "It wasn't me." It happens again. So then Eli understands that he discerns that it's the Lord that's actually talking to him. So Eli tells him, "Go back and lay down. And when you hear your name, Samuel, Samuel, called to you, respond and say, 'Here I am. Here is your servant. What can I do for you?'" So Samuel goes and lays back down. And it says in 1 Samuel chapter 3, it says, while he was laying there, it says, "Then the Lord came and stood and called as he did the other times, 'Samuel, Samuel.' And Samuel said, 'Speak, for your servant is listening.'" So here's the thing that grabs me in this whole story. It was his mother's will for him to be dedicated to the Lord. It was his mother's will for him to have this faith. But it was at this moment that we see Samuel respond to the Lord, and he says, "Your servant is listening." This is when Samuel's faith becomes his own, and he lays up his life and he follows the Lord. And we see the progression of Samuel's life all the way through. It's a different contrast than what we saw with the other judges. This guy was used in a mighty way. He was used to deliver hard news to people. He had to deliver hard news to the priest Eli, because Eli was he was a bad father essentially, and he was going to get judged, and his sons were going to get judged, and Samuel had to deliver that news. Samuel was used to anoint the two kings, King Saul, King David. He was used to bring bad news to Saul, bring good news to David. He just laid up his life and followed him. He made it his own. And so I would ask you guys the same question. Is your faith your own, or is it something that you are piggybacking off of on your parents? Because there's a sheer difference between the two. Like, you have to understand what Jesus Christ has done for you. And when you become a follower, it's not going to be easy. It wasn't hard. I'm sure it wasn't easy for Samuel. Some of the hard things that he had to do and carry these news to Eli, carry this news to King Saul when they were not following or being obedient to the Lord. They had to judge the affairs of Israel. And we as followers, we are called into hard trials and hard situations as well. It's not easy, and I would be lying to you if you don't know who he is, that it's just a cakewalk along the way, because it's not. How are you handling yourself through those trials? It tells us in James, it says in James 1, "Consider it a joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." How are you handling yourself through the trials as a believer? Are you walking worthy of the calling? Are you listening to the word of the Lord in your life? In Ephesians 4, it tells us, "Therefore, I, a prisoner of the Lord," this is Paul talking, "implore you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling with which you have been called." If you've been called, are you walking worthy of that calling? "With all humility and gentleness, with patience, showing tolerance for one another in love, being diligent to preserve the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace." I want you to look at the questions. I want you to all get real as usual, and I can't wait to hear how it goes.